the South African Jewish Board of Deputies, the clergy and my fellow HIP Alliance colleagues. A mention of thanks to Craig Sherman, Manuel Diakakis and the Minister's team. We welcome our Jewish and Lebanese attendees today. It has always been HIP's goal to highlight the contribution and concerns of the Hellenic, Italian, Portuguese and other minority communities within South Africa. And we will continue to do this undeterred. We will continue our social compact projects and charitable work that is so desperately needed right now. Our heritage, customs and religion may be as Hellenic or Italian, etc., but we do so as South Africans. As South Africans, we need to unite and create prosperity for all. But most importantly, we need to get involved. I now would like to hand over to Aki Anastasiou to start tonight's proceedings. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, very good evening to you all. Thank you very much for the introduction, John, and a special welcome to the Honourable Minister, the Acting Minister in the Presidency, Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, and also a big welcome as well to Dr. Stavros Nicolaou, who's the Chairman of the HIP Alliance, and Mr. Zev Krengel from the SA Jewish Board of Deputies, the National Vice President of the South African Vice President of the South African Jewish Board of Deputies. Welcome you all, and welcome to everybody that's joining us today, wherever you might be in the country. It's lovely to have you with us. I'm glad the temperature's improved. I'm glad our numbers are coming down across the country. But before we get into our discussion, I think we have to have a very, very frank and open discussion. I would like to invite and introduce and a warm welcome to His Eminence, the Archbishop Damaskinos, to lead us into prayer before we start tonight's proceedings. So, Archbishop Damaskinos, good evening to you. Kalispera σας, σεβασμιότατε.
Was it not? They need to unmute.
Archbishop, I think you're on mute. If you can unmute yourself so we can hear you. And just shift your... Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear. Please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much because you invite me in this conference, in this
webinar.
In this meeting. Let us pray to the Lord.
Lord have mercy.
Our God, Βασιλεύ ουράνιε παράκλητε το πνεύμα της αληθείας, ο πανταχού παρών και τα πάντα πληρών, ο θησαυρός των αγαθών και ζωής χορηγός, ελθέ και σκήνωσον εν μήν, και καθάρισον ημάς από πάσης κυλίδος, και σώσον αγαθέτας ψυχάς ημών. Almighty God, give all of us in South Africa love, freedom, stability, abundance, and peace for this country. Unity of South Africans. All of these are gifts of God, and all of this we can keep in our life every day. I mean, I would like, on behalf of the Orthodox Church in South Africa, to wish you to have a good progress and a good discussions and explanations in this conference about the country. But all of us, we must remember that we are passengers in the same ship. And all of us, we must cooperate. All of us, we must keep to be united, because if we have problem with the passengers of the ship does not go in the right tangent, but has problem. It's very simple, that everything that I say to you, and all of these simple words, we must keep in our mind, in our hearts, and also please keep the unite, keep the love, keep the stability, keep the peace. I mean, thank you very much. God bless you.
Thank you so much, Your Eminence, and thank you very much for leading us into prayer. And really, you know, we're all on the same ship, and you're 100% right. So when you look at us today, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to all of you. If you have just joined us, you missed our very brief introduction earlier. I'd like to welcome you all to this HIP Alliance webinar entitled South Africa After the Unrest. And I think that we're all questioning so much of what has happened in the last month. And you know, I've had time to reflect as well as everybody else. I remember 27 years ago, flying around in the helicopter, covering our very first democratic election. In fact, you can't see it here, but there's a picture here that was taken by the Associated Press, taken over Soweto, of the snaking queue of people waiting to cast their first votes in 1994. And I've had the privilege of covering every other democratic election in this country since 94. But I think what we've all seen in the last few weeks has just torn us all apart. And I think that when you look at us as a country and you look at this rainbow nation that we started off as back in 1994, and you look at the current, you know, the current global poster child that we became of this rainbow nation that we talk about, ironically now we're a global poster child for economic inequality. And this is the reality in South Africa, where we have deep poverty that sits in the shadow of this astronomical wealth. What role do we all play in this? What role can we play for us to get out of this situation that we're in at the moment? How did we get here? And I think that, you know, if you look at the age-old problems, we cannot ignore things like corruption, state failure, tribalism, cronyism. Has our government failed us? Has the ANC led us down the incorrect path? Or has the ANC had its own challenges to overcome to make, you know, to balance the inequality of the past? So I guess there are lots of questions, and we can sit and philosophize this for a long, long time. But what has happened in the last few months is a stark wake-up call for all of us. It's a wake-up call that this violence has deeper roots than the former President Zuma, for example. I mean, this has got a lot to do with the fact that we are living in a country where we have 74% of our youths under the age of 25 that are jobless. 43% of the entire population of potential workers in South Africa do not have a job. Half of all South Africans are chronically poor. And the most neglected of all, the level of assets and inequality, of income inequality, make this country the most economically unjust society on earth. I'm not making these statistics up. These are statistics that have come from global economists, global think tanks that describe South Africa as the most unjust society in the world. Not just in Africa, in the world. we have a lack of confidence. We have a lack of hope right now. But at the end of the day, I think that as South Africans, we have demonstrated when we get together and we put our differences aside, what we can really truly achieve in this magnificent country that we're in. And hence this discussion that we want over here. And ultimately, I want us to go back to 94, where the much political touted slogan was a better life for all. And I think ultimately, that is what we have to strive to achieve. A better life for all South Africans. What do we do about it? What role does the HIP Alliance have to play? And it's a great pleasure for me to welcome the head of the Health Committee of Business for South Africa. That's one of his roles. He's also the chairman of the HIP Alliance, and it's none other than Dr. Stavros Nicolaou. Stavro and I have had many conversations like this. I remember pre-94, Stavro, that we had a very similar birth of this particular movement before the first democratic elections. I remember that day so distinctly at the Cypriot Club when we had Tokyo Sexwale sitting there with other political leaders at the time. And that was just over 28 years ago. It was a year before the election. And even then, we spoke about the inequality that we have to overcome. 28 years down the line, we're still having the same discussion. But I remain optimistic, and I know you're one of the most optimistic people I've met. So without any further ado, Dr. Stavros Nicolaou, it's over to you.
IT Program Director, thanks very much for those introductory remarks. You're quite right, we did have this discussion over 28 years ago, and you don't seem to have aged a single day, so it means you continue to be optimistic, and I think you continue to demonstrate your optimism, most certainly. May I also, whilst I'm getting my slides up, may I also take the opportunity to acknowledge the Minister. She has a dual portfolio. She's the acting Minister in the Presidency, but also moonlights at the moment as the Minister for Small Business, a very critical portfolio in our country, as you've heard from Aki. Ladies and gentlemen, let me also just acknowledge and greet the other fellow panelists, in particular Zef Kengel, who continues to demonstrate that same optimism around the country, and Zef and the Jewish Board of Deputies, the HIP communities have had many discussions, very often find ourselves in a very similar position, all want to embrace the mainstream of South African society, all want to contribute positively. And in the same vein, we also have some of our South African Lebanese colleagues on the call. So I think that's the first order of duty this evening, is just to greet you all and thank you for your individual contributions. And as Aki said, only if we work together, shoulder to the wheel, all of us, can we reverse many, if not all, of the images that we saw. Many of these images were haunting images, and I think many of these can be reversed, provided we all work together as we have been doing. But also, there's a need to re-look at some of the economic models of the country, there's no doubt. I'm here this evening in my Business for South Africa capacity, and I wanted to touch on two aspects. The first is I wanted to just consider for a moment what happened a fortnight ago, what were its manifestations, but I think more importantly, what do we do as a country to move forward? I think that's what investors, we've spoken to many of the overseas investors, and I think many of them have discounted what happened in part as an emerging market phenomenon. It most certainly has some idiosyncratic elements when we look at South Africa, and Aki has very aptly articulated what those are. And many are prepared to give us the benefit of the doubt. But I think what they're more interested in, and I think what we should probably all be more interested in, is how do we move forward from the events of 2 weeks ago. What actions do we take as a country collectively to move forward and put ourselves on a completely different trajectory? Can I just get my first slide, Sanele? Let's just consider for a moment, why did this happen? And there are many hypotheses and theories that are floating around as to what happened 2 weeks ago. And it's probably best to describe this as a conflation of a number of issues. Many of them have been brewing for many years, for many months. I'm not going to cover all of the conflations, but unquestionably, as the President of the Republic said, there was certainly an element of economic sabotage. Some people might say it was orchestrated. There was no doubt an element of the inequality that exists in the country, a widening Gini coefficient. A significant part of our youth, particularly ages of 18 to 30, remain unemployed in our country. And then, of course, there was also an element of, unquestionably, an element of what we would consider to be the melting pot or the overboil of a COVID pandemic that has been extremely damaging to the economy and to people's lives and livelihoods. So it was a conflation of all of these issues. Sorry, can you just excuse me for 1 second? I just need to connect my computer. Apologies. 1 sec.
So while Sabotage is doing that, let me also just remind you all that tonight's session is a very interactive session, right? So please, any comments that you want to make, any questions that you have for any of the speakers, which we will get to at the end of this particular webinar, we will ask those questions. And I want us to ask the brutal, tough questions. I want us to dig in deep and ask the uncomfortable questions. We need to be uncomfortable with what is going on around us in this country. And I'd like to urge you just to put your questions in the chat section and your thoughts. It doesn't necessarily have to be a question. What are your thoughts on the topic tonight? So, Stavro, are you back?
Sorry, I am. Apologies for that, Aki. And I was just saying that unquestionably, 17 months of grinding hardship that has been occasioned by the most destructive pandemic that we've known has certainly taken its toll, and I think things boiled over, and that was part of the reason. So if we to analyze these different conflations, those are some of the elements. I don't intend going through all of those, but as a preface to the presentation I'm going to make, I've decided that this evening it would be good to focus on trying to analyze why this happened, but more importantly, as I said earlier, how do we move forward from here? How do these communities move forward? Understandably, that confidence has been shattered in some respects, and in fact, in many respects. How do we move forward from this? What is our role, and how do we contribute to broader society to allow us to move forward, so that we don't get a repeat of those, as I said, those harrowing and haunting visuals we saw 2 weeks ago. And I've also, with a particular bias, had a look at, and that's why I spent a bit of time saying that the impact of the pandemic has also taken a toll. It's not only taken an economic and a public health toll, but it's taken a mental health toll as well on the country. Mental well-being has been put under immense scrutiny like never before. And it's because of all this uncertainty, because of all, people are losing. There's hardly anyone probably on this call that hasn't lost a family member or a close friend or someone that we know. So all of these factors have come into play. But I'm more interested in how do we move forward from here. And secondly, because I'm talking about the pandemic so extensively, at the center of the pandemic and at the center, I believe, of our economic recovery and how we lift ourselves up. And we've done this many times as South Africans. We measure our resilience as South Africans, not how many times we go down, but it's how many times do we go down and lift ourselves up again. And I think part of that lifting exercise is an efficient, effective, and swift vaccination program. So I'm going to cover those two aspects in the next ensuing slides. So let's just have a look at what 2 or 3 weeks ago, what has that cost the economy? So firstly, it's estimated that around 50 billion rand was lost in output. Potentially 150,000 jobs have been placed at risk. And we know that in the looting, around $1.5 billion rand was lost. That's obviously placed a significant emphasis on Sasria and various other related Sasria matters. Before the events of 2 weeks ago, Bloomberg's and JP Morgan were both estimating a growth of around 0.5% to 1% for Q3. That's the quarter that we're currently in. And as a consequence of the unrest, the protests, the revised projections from both of these entities is that the economy will contract by 3%. So that places in very stark contrast what we were expecting at the beginning of the quarter. Furthermore, CNBC reported that South Africa's economic growth prospects declined by 3.8%, almost 4%, post the riots, from a positive 4.3 pre-riots. And then lastly, the World Bank had South Africa to grow at 3.5% for the quarter, and you can see that we are likely to register a decline for the quarter. So certainly at an economic metric level, the unrest and violence, the consequences of that are pretty clear in terms of the economic picture. I'm not really going to cover the toll on the social picture and all the other elements. I think we need to first look at what is the economic impact. Next slide. Okay, we can unpack this a little more, and we could say that the overall loss in terms of KZN long-term prospects, and this was reported by the mayor of eThekwini amongst others, is in the range of 10 to 15 billion rand. We also saw 1,200 retail outlets looted, and as I said, 150,000 informal traders were also targeted in this. And in the context of the vaccine rollout program, 120 pharmacies were looted, burnt down, or had to close. And everyone expected that the vaccine rollout program would suffer a mortal blow. And in fact, that didn't happen. And if we can go to my next slide. Okay, what did we actually see happening once the violence broke out and society was starting to come to terms with the shock it had experienced? What did we actually see in real terms? Because we could have gone one of two ways as a country. You could have had the whole country plunging into the same level of unrest. It could have become completely pervasive in all 9 provinces, and you could have had ongoing looting for weeks on end until you had nothing left, right? We could have had the vaccine program, and there's nothing more important than the vaccination program right now to getting us back to an element of normality and opening up the economy again. As I said, the program was expected to, at very least, be disrupted for weeks on end. In fact, we saw a strengthening of the program. So we lost around 45,000 vaccinations a day for the first 2 days. We went down from 170,000 vaccines per day in the preceding days of the outbreak of the violence, and we dropped to around 140,000 2 days after the violence started to subside. And then we suddenly picked up. We went to 230, 240,000. We're averaging 220,000 at the moment. Now, why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because society reacted in a very positive way. So despite all the trauma and despite us all being shocked to the core, society stood up and said, you know, we're not having this. And that's what gives myself, it gives a lot of investors confidence in this country, is how did private and public sector work together? How did we get together to try and solve the immediacy of the problems? And how did society react? Society pushed back in a very strong way. Communities protected their local economies and immediately assisted with the cleanup efforts. We saw that. We saw business and government working together to donate supplies, food parcels, and other things that are important for everyday life to continue. We saw society donating these things again. We saw the solidarity fund again coming into play and starting to donate food parcels and the likes thereof. We saw taxi owners and taxi federations who are often cast as the villains. We saw that grouping coming together and protecting property and livelihoods like we had never seen before. This was a test of our judicial system. It was a test of the rule of law. And I think we've demonstrated again as South Africans that we respect the rule of law, despite what we would have seen on those visuals. When sanity prevailed, a number of arrests have been made, special courts have been set up, and the rule of law remains paramount in all of this. These are all things that investors are going to look at. Of course, we need to condemn in the strongest terms the life that was lost. You know, you can always try and bring property back. And equipment and stock, but you can't bring back a human life. And that's the regrettable part here. And I'm really hoping that the perpetrators now understand that you cannot bring a human life, but they also should understand that the best attempts have failed here because society pushed back like it hasn't pushed back before. And that gives me a lot of confidence moving forward. So my next slide. I spoke about the vaccine rollout program, and I'm putting this at the center of economic recovery. And I've also indicated in previous webinars that there is no more important economic recovery plan right now in our country than vaccinating as many people as quickly as possible. And again, if there was a test ever of the durability and resilience of South Africans, it's the fact that we got the program running again when many, as I said, would have expected it to collapse. And that gives me a lot of hope, because if we can respond in the midst of a crisis, the way we responded around the food parcel relief, the protection of property, ensuring that we didn't lose a beat with the vaccine rollout program. Those are all immensely positive aspects that would give investors confidence that they should be giving South Africa a second look. Many have said, well, we're going to turn investors away forever. But I think the way the markets have responded, the way investors have responded and said, look, we're judging you by how you reacted, and we're judging you with how you respond futuristically. That gives a lot of confidence. And I'm pleased to say that right now, we are almost at 8 million vaccinations. If you take the last month of July, we were amongst the fastest in the world on a per capita basis, faster than countries like Germany, Italy, and some of the other European countries. So this demonstrates to me, ladies and gentlemen, that we can, when the chips are down, we can respond. When we work together as South Africans, private and public sector, we can achieve anything, including amongst the fastest vaccine rollout, as we did in July when we started working together. Next slide. Okay, I've pretty much covered this. This gives us the trajectory for the vaccine rollout, over the next 6 or 7 months. At the current trajectory and where we are building our capacity up to, we will in fact leapfrog many countries around the world, particularly emerging markets, which is what we of course are considered to be. And this is important, of course, so that we can reopen up our economies again. We can remove this boiling pot that I spoke about earlier. We can return to some element of normality. And importantly, we can start trading with our international partners again. Part of the concern we had earlier this year when we had a slow start to the vaccine rollout was that our international trading partners had vaccinated significant swathes of their population, had opened up their economies, and were reluctant to trade with us. So the quicker we get this done, and we're on a good pathway at the moment, the quicker we can open up again, we can start attracting tourists again into our country. We can start bringing investors back in. We can start trading bilaterally and multilaterally. So this is critical, and the program stood the test of time. It stood up to the most violent attempts to disrupt it. Pharmacies burning down, GP practices burning down, stood the test to all of those things, and we were able to move forward. And I'm using the vaccine rollout program as a rallying point for how we can look at the future. So we can look at the future as the visuals continue haunting us. We're helpless. We're never going to recover from this. Let's pack up and go. Or we can say we see opportunity. And the opportunity that we see is the following three issues I want to leave you with. The first is that the events of 2 or 3 weeks ago do provide some silver lining. It provides an opportunity for us to reflect as a country and as a society, and to start pursuing a new economic model, an economic model that will make sense for many more of the population than it currently is the case. We can dream of a new economic model along the lines of program. Private and public sector are working together seamlessly. We need to look at those other areas in the economy where we can work together, private and public sector, to rally our country to new heights and new growth points. Very lastly, I know that all of you are probably sitting here and wondering, that the events were just too traumatic to deal with. You can't deal with them going forward, and how are we ever going to emerge from this? And I think when you're at that point, remember how the vaccine program rallied in the midst of some of the some of the worst violence perpetrated against the healthcare system in this country. It rallied. Think about how ordinary South Africans put their hands in their pockets and extended a helping hand to those that had been devastated by this. Think of those that contributed to the Solidarity Fund to ensure that people that had no bread and milk got bread and milk. So think about all of those examples and think about the future and the difference we can all make. Thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure speaking to you this evening.
Thank you so much, Stavros. And I see that we already have several questions that have come in, and thank you very much for all the questions. Please do keep them coming in. I see your questions there, Zolani. I see some of you have typed in anonymous questions saying, well, you are speaking from a place of comfort. Most of us protected the infrastructure we have as we don't want to lose out. Our people want economic freedom now and not later than tomorrow. We can't speak of economic recovery without speaking onto economic imbalances in our country. Blacks continue to be poor while whites continue to enjoy wealth of the country more than any other race. Well, I guess that could be debated, but the reality of the inequality cannot be debated. It is a stark reminder of where we are in our society in South Africa, and we should all be hanging our heads in shame as to where we find ourselves right now. But we will unpack all of this as the evening progresses. I would now like to welcome our next speaker, who's going to be talking just ahead of the minister. And I see there he is, Mr. Zev Krengel, who is the Vice President, National Vice President of the South African Jewish Board of Deputies, to give us a community perspective, a message of calm, and what do we need to do as a community to move forward. Zev, good evening to you.
Thank you, Aki. Really, it's great to be on, and well done to my other speakers, especially Stavros. Doing such great work with the vaccine rollouts and with the vaccine production. Look, for me, we did a webinar, the board, Professor Karen Milner, who's our Gauteng chair, did it like in the house. It was I think it was the Wednesday or the Tuesday night, where South Africa was burning. I don't want to downplay the stress we all had. I think also for South Africans, and especially white South Africans, it's been a fear. We've literally lived our lives with. I'm 49 years old, and I was told by I was brought up with people immigrating saying, it's going to go to nothing, and this was some of our biggest fears started coming true. We can debate where it started, who started it, how did it start. There's no doubt the Moy River toll gate and the burning of the trucks was definitely the catalyst. And then it spread. And was it spread by criminal elements? Was it politically started? And then, of course, at the end of the day, there was a lot of free ride. There was a lot of criminality. There was a lot of other issues. So I think it was one of our darker days. If I stand back, I would say it was probably Soweto riot, state of emergency. Maybe they were darker, but for the fear factor, I don't think you could have got much worse. And it wasn't a pleasant experience to be, and the same as the pandemic. I would have much preferred for it never to have happened, and I would have much preferred to try and carry on with our challenges, which are massive, and our challenges in this country are huge. I think the thing we all struggle with as black and white South Africans is we just feel we're not getting a break long term. Like we get knocked, as I said in the webinar, I feel like we're in the ring with Mike Tyson. And as we start feeling we're getting better, and we started coming out of the COVID second wave, and the economy started going, and our rand started improving, commodities started going, exports, the mines were doing well. Then the third wave came and it knocked us, and then we were hoping to get over the third wave, and then the rioting and looting happened. So I don't want to paint a picture that everything's brilliant, because I think it was very tough for everyone. I do think that we as a South African people are unbelievably resilient. We're a nation that civil society, once again, black, white, Indian, and coloured, across the racial lines, across the religious lines, all stuck together to stand up and to protect their country, South Africa. I really believe the level of commitment, even if you read about what the looting, how many people told the authorities about neighbors and friends and family that went to loot it. So I do think we as a South African society, once again, has proven our mettle, and once again has proven in dark hours how good we are to each other. And it was an absolute minority who did the rioting and looting, absolute minority. A lot of people try to predict it was the worst case scenario of a populist uprising with no leadership. And it wasn't a populist uprising at all. I mean, even the Minister of Defence said it herself that they were caught with their pants down. And I do think the security cluster was caught. That they should have been more prepared. We should have been more prepared for what it was as a country. But we got knocked down in the first round by Mark Tyson. It was a hard blow. We got put back into the side of the ring. Our coach gave us a good pep talk, and fans kept telling us to do well, although some people still are hoping that we fail, which we never do. And we came back, and we leveled the playing fields. And you look back 2.5, 3 weeks later, our rands improved, our commodities and our taxes are coming back. The president has brought us down out of 4 to 3, which is well done to society for behaving. And our strain on the health sector is getting better, and we worked through it. We really worked through it as a society. I do think there's some things we need to learn from it. South Africa is a pressure cooker on many levels, and I just think it was too much in one scenario. There were 3 weeks of many things. An immediate past president was arrested. You had a third wave happening with a level 4 lockdown. And just and we've had incredibly low, slow growth. We'd had a fairly low vaccine rollout at the time, so I think there was a lot of frustration. But looking back at the time, I was quite optimistic, and I'm actually more optimistic 10 days, 2 weeks later. I think government did come to the party unbelievably well. I think no one believed that N3 highway would have been opened by the Monday. We, as the Jewish community in Durban, was very rattled, and we were very worried about, what the food safety and the food security, and we read all the doomsday scenarios that there's going to be massive lines and queues. And as Stavros said before me, the South Africa works at its best when it's a public-private partnership. When government and private sector work together, it doesn't happen as often as I personally would like. I think there's a certain level of wariness from government, and I think there's a certain level of wariness from the private sector. But government got that N3 opened, and I mean, the likes of Pick n Pay and Boxer and all the others, I mean, they brought food back into KZN like no one's seen. I mean, those trucks came in, they opened the Moy River toll gate, the trucks just went go, 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 go. go. And literally this doomsday scenario of the people starving in KZN, and it's going to take 6-8 weeks, and there's going to be airlifts, and there's going to be flights, and how they're going to, it all ended where literally almost every person in KZN got fed. And those doomsdays, we proved as the government working with the private sector, we proved all the they say is wrong. So I'm personally would have preferred it not to happen, and we can scrutinize why it did happen. And we really pray and hope that government takes its precautions that it doesn't happen again, because there are always sparks that these, and if there is going to be a spark, government needs to understand where the spark is and what it's going to do. Any constitutional democracy is uncomfortable seeing soldiers on their streets, but how well the Defence Force did. I mean, they policed well. There were no reported cases of any brutality or deaths at the Defence Force. And you need to give government its credit. It came late, but it did, it did come through. And then, as I said, I have to give unbelievable credit to the private sector for restocking, for being committed. And then for me, it was civil society. I mean, we went to Davidton to go and do cleanup operation literally on the Wednesday or the Thursday. I mean, where places were still burning, and the level of commitment of the people around these centres that have been absolutely brutal. Hugely looted and destroyed was just incredible how quickly it was cleaned up. It's going to take time. I don't think it's going to be a quick. I think KZN, it's always going to be wary. Once something breaks, it's hard to fix it. It's much easier to burn something down and build it up. But we as a society did very well, really moving much closer to the Greek community and the minority communities, the white minority communities, whether it's religion or national. nationality, the Jewish, Portuguese, the Greek communities. I think we have an obligation as whites, as minorities, and as South African citizens to the broader South Africa. To ourselves. I think South Africa has been unbelievably good to us as South African citizens. The majority of us, the majority of South African Jewry are Lithuanian descendants. We came to the shores of South Africa from the late 1800s to most probably the mid 1930s. When we were stopped to come as Jews, the quotas were stopped, and a lot of our families were killed and murdered in the Holocaust. But I think Africa and South Africa has been unbelievably good. Not only to the Jewish community, but to out of this. We can get closer out of this, and we can decide what we're going to learn from this. The knee-jerk reaction of the naysayers was not proven correct, and we have done very well. And we have done. Am I still on?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, so I think we're really done. Unbelievably well as a society, and I just really want to congratulate anyone who was positive, who worked theory. How do we go from here? I think that's a lot. Of the questions I've been asked, and I do believe that sometimes we do live a bit insular, and I do think we as different communities need to understand the importance of working in the greater South Africa and take ownership. We live in a constitutional democracy. You can love the government, you can hate the government, you can support the ANC, you can support the EFF, you can support the DA, but be a part of South Africa, be a part of this great nation. And between you and me, I think we are in a lot better position than we think we are. And I really fully agree with Stavros that the vaccine rollout's doing unbelievably well. And let's hope our economy can start ticking over. And I'm just saying, personally, I'm committed to this country, committed to it. Education. So let us all do it together, and I do plea with the minister and the government to work with the private sector, because we make an unbelievable partnership when you have the private and public sector together, working together. And I just really want to wish everyone the best. It wasn't a simple period, and I'm telling you that we didn't lose like some people lost livelihoods, jobs, and it wasn't just the rich multinationals. People lost their businesses, they lost their livelihoods. So it wasn't a pleasant situation, but we'll be judged how we move from this unpleasant situation and make this country a great country that we deserve it to be, as all South Africans. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for that, Zev. Zev, of course, is the National Vice President of the South African Jewish Board of Deputies. Thank you very much for that introduction, Zev. We got lots of questions that we're going to get through, and there's some really tough questions that need to be answered. And I know some of you are responding anonymously, which is fine. But you know, if you can give us your names as well. I mean, we're having a very frank and open discussion, but this is what it's about. So you can remain anonymous if you like. Please do type in your questions, your thoughts on what you've heard so far, and after the minister has finished speaking, we will have a Q&A. We'll address some of your questions and really discuss what we're all here to discuss. And the importance of today's webinar is to to from here. And 50 billion rand is what it's cost our GDP. And the inequality, it keeps coming up over and over in all of the comments in the section. So keep typing them in. We'll get to those right after the minister has spoken. And it's a great pleasure to welcome the minister. I remember when the minister was announced by President Ramaphosa. I think it was in January of this year, Minister, if I'm not mistaken. You are the Minister of Small Business Development as well, so you're actually effectively wearing two hats. You're the acting minister in the presidency, and really you've had a very tough role to deal with, because I mean, so much of what we we're going to be talking about really touches on so many of your roles that you have in government. So great pleasure to welcome you, Minister Khumbudzo Ntshavheni. I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you for joining us. We really do appreciate your time, Minister.
Thank you, Aki, and thank you to everybody who's participating, to the Archbishop. For the prayer and everybody, and the HIP Alliance for the invitation. When our mutual friend, Ambassador Mopela, said to me, I think you need to talk to this community, I was asking myself, how will the conversation goes? But until Stavro spoke, I realized that I should have just been here to fill the questions. And unfortunately, I'll have to be excused at 8 o'clock. I have another commitment which we need to get to. So I may not stay longer for the conversations beyond that. Stavro says, I moonlight in small business. Actually, I moonlight in the presidency. I'm the Minister for Small Business Development. So, maybe where do I start? Because everybody has done the intro of the context of where we are or where we have been. But for me, the issue is that the event of 3 weeks ago could be a precursor to a bigger situation. If certain things are not done. And that will not be because the security cluster would have been caught napping, they would have been ready. But no matter the number of police and number of soldiers you deploy against hungry people, it cannot solve the problem. So the IMF, and people have read statistics, and I want to differ with some of the statistics, but it's fine. The IMF said South Africa is amongst the top leading in the inequality stakes, and this is the report they produced last year. And last year, October, they say 20% of the populations hold 68% of the income, whereas 40% of the population that is below, which is unfortunately majority Black and African, holds 77% of the income. And the unemployment rate, and the official statistic is that unemployment rate by Q1 of this year is 32.6%, and the minister responsible for statistics, so I'm quoting the statistics figures. And that number for youth between the ages of 15 to 34 years is 46.3%. This is Q1 of this year. So if majority of our people, the poor, remains unemployed, they earn a meager income, they go hungry, what is supposed to happen to a population? And I like what Zev said. He said, and I want to quote, that South Africa has been very good to the minorities. Imagine a Black child in Kwamashu, in Makwarera, in Langa, in Nyanga, in Soweto, and in Alexander, hearing Zev saying South Africa has been good to the minorities, whereas it has not been good to a Black child. What does that feel like? And it's good to make that acknowledgement, because when you make that acknowledgement, you start to say, how do I give back? Because, and I'm glad that we are meeting here with some of you, if there is a community, if there are communities that are entrepreneurial in this country, is this community that we are talking to today, the Hellenics, the Italians, the Portuguese, you bring in now you've brought in the Lebanese and the Jews. And this is the most entrepreneurial of our communities in this country. So the question that I have in this discussion is to say, how do we bring your lived experience in entrepreneurship to create opportunities for the youth that are unemployed? How do you create, and not just youth, Black African youth in this country? Because the more we just talk about youth in general and not be specific to the group that is unemployed, we won't address the issue. Because what this situation has brought to us is to open our eyes to say, it's not government that's going to be a loser alone. It's also the private sector that is going to be a loser. And we have always said, no, this is ANC factional issues, this is the problem of government. And business claim to have come to the party, but reports that we have seen are saying majority of big business have kept their monies in reserves in their bank accounts, but they have not invested that in the country to create employment and opportunities for Black people, for women, and for young people in particular. So this is a question that we all have to say, how is business, big and small, in South Africa going to come to the party? How does the HIP Alliance as a community come to the party and say, in the communities where you reside, whether you are in KZN, whether you are in Gauteng, whether you are in Limpopo, whether in Cape Town, whether you are in the Eastern Cape, how do you come to the party in those communities and make sure that young women who are Black are supported to run businesses successfully? That when in their supply chains, value chains, and I know some, I think the Portuguese in the main, they run the corner shops. I grew up in buying in a corner shop of one of the Portuguese families, and I was saying, how do you make sure that you assist that young person who's running a spaza shop, that it can grow to become another corner shop in another? Area, because those are the fundamental things we must deal with. Because I see the cleaning campaigns, we can all clean, but that is not meaningful. What is meaningful is that how do we change the income levels of these people? How do we deal with meaningfully with inequality? We can do donations, it's fine, but you can't donate every day. But also you don't give dignity to people when you donate. What you give dignity to is when you create a job. That person will be able to work and an income, or you create an opportunity for that person to start their own business or support them to run their own business and make sure that their business thrives. And I understand the context of ZEF, where it comes from, to say when they came through, when they were after the Holocaust and everything, and they came through, they were supported to make sure that the Lithuanian Jews, when they landed here, and any other Jewish community that when they landed here, and any other minority, they could survive. the question is, how do we use that experience to support Black people, to support women, to support young people? Because we cannot continue to speak from our positions of comfort. We must really make the the rubber must hit the tar in meaningful ways and not in superficial ways. Because if we don't do it, we are sitting in a time bomb, if not worse. And when we go again, you are part of the largest, you may be the largest employers if we aggregate yourselves as communities, even in the small businesses that you run. The people that you employ in those shops of yours, the people that you employ in those businesses of yours, in those chains that you run, the network of businesses that you run. How can we account that those people are South African? And linked to that issue is the issue of racism. And I was baffled when I went to Soweto. After the riots and everything. And the rule was they didn't attack Maponya Mall, though the community also defended because it's a Black-owned business. But they went to attack Jabulani Mall and Protea Mall. Mall, and they say it's white monopoly capital, but it's owned by Mike Nkuna. It's an old man from Limpopo. I know him personally. And young people are asking, and somebody asked the very question here to say we guarded those shopping centers, we guarded those malls, but what then? Because even the security in the shopping centers that majority white people run is not done. It's not by South Africans, Blacks. African in particular, it's done somehow. It's not even by the local community. You go to, even if you go to a neighborhood that a business operates, a cleaning company is not a cleaning company from that. township. And we're still saying the community came to the party. Yes, the community came to the party. So us as government, as business, what are we doing in exchange for to reward the community, but not to reward the community, but to say this South Africa belongs to all, not